In his book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, author Patrick Lencioni tells the fictional story of a fast-growing startup with a bunch of potential that quickly starts declining in performance because of some pretty significant dysfunctions. To address those dysfunctions, a new CEO is brought in, and after observing the company for a while, she brings the leadership team together and starts to sketch out this specific model on the whiteboard. A model that captures the 5 specific dysfunctions that she has observed in her lengthy experience working with organizations. In this video, I'm going to share what those 5 dysfunctions are, and then I'm going to share a specific visual thinking tool that can address those dysfunctions. At the lowest level of this pyramid, we have the dysfunction of absence of trust. If trust does not exist amongst the members of a team, then you can't have meaningful conflict, which is where the next dysfunction comes in, fear of conflict. It's easy to think that conflict in all forms is bad. That's not true. Teams need to engage in meaningful conflict to make important decisions. But that conflict can only take place when there's already a level of trust. But it's not just about hashing out those conflicts, it's also about committing to specific actions. And lack of commitment is the next dysfunction here. You need buy-in from your team members, and then you need to hold those team members accountable. And it's the avoidance of accountability that's the next dysfunction. People need to know what they're responsible for, and they need to know what good looks like and held to those standards, so that as a team, you can achieve meaningful results. And it's the inattention to results that's the final dysfunction here. Your team exists to achieve a particular outcome. What is that goal? What are those results? And are you actually paying attention to them? One of the things I appreciate about how this model is laid out and how it's sketched out on the board during these off-site retreats is that there's this additional piece of evidence showing that these dysfunctions are in place. So one piece of evidence that points toward an absence of trust on the team is invulnerability. The lack of willingness of your team members to be vulnerable with each other. If they're not willing to be vulnerable, none of these other issues can be addressed. The evidence for a fear of conflict is artificial harmony. Do you pretend to get along and be okay with things, even when there's something brewing underneath, something that hasn't been said, a conflict that hasn't been addressed? The evidence for lack of commitment is ambiguity. Is there some uncertainty about what needs to be done? And even if you know what needs to be done, is there clarity around what good looks like? Or are there simply low standards in place? And then as you look to what the team is actually trying to achieve as a whole, the evidence of an inattention to specific results is when more attention is placed on individuals' status and ego. So these here are the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Let's look next at one technique, one approach that you can use to address these dysfunctions. And the shape of that approach happens to be the inverse of this triangle. And it's a technique that involves moving beyond the typical style of communication with 2 or more people just talking things out, and instead introduces a third point. So that instead of relying on just this back and forth, you have a visual artifact to build out and reference throughout the conversation. Similar to how the new CEO sketched out this pyramid on the whiteboard while talking through each of these important issues that that team needed to address, the purpose of this technique here, which is called Threepoint communication, the purpose is to have better conversations by giving all members of that conversation a third thing to reference to keep everyone on the same page, to avoid the stalling or derailing that might arise from interpersonal tensions, so that you can discuss what you actually need to discuss and decide where to go next. The creation of this common sketched reference point can be kickstarted by the person initiating the conversation or the meeting, but I think it's most powerful when every member of the conversation can contribute to it. Because I think this style of communication, of collaboration, can address each of these dysfunctions of a team. So let's list those out as potential solutions to each of those 5 dysfunctions. One way to instill trust among team members is simply to capture their contributions so that they know that their input has been heard. And those contributions can be seen on the page, on the whiteboard. I also view this third point as kind of a neutral ground that makes it easier to argue about the ideas being discussed, not the people behind them, which can reduce the fear of conflict. Once you have had and documented that argument over those ideas on the page, that will set you up for identifying some clear next steps that are documented so that there's not ambiguity about who needs to do what. And you can assign those tasks to specific people through this common reference point so that each member can take responsibility for their part in the plan. And then finally, through this shared visual reference, you can be explicit about the goals that your team is working toward, goals that the team will achieve, not ones based on individual status and ego. So when you're able to sketch out the important components of a team discussion, when you're defining strategy, doing some annual planning, addressing a pressing challenge within the organization, this mode of communication right here becomes a powerful way to address those dysfunctions and perhaps even to prevent them from occurring in the first place. Now, this skill of 3-point communication, where you create a shared visual artifact in a one-on-one or group meeting, might be pretty new to you, and it might feel a bit daunting. And one of the goals of my work is to make it less daunting. I want to help you develop these visual thinking skills, the ability to sketch out simple drawings and diagrams as you're wrapping your head around complex challenges. And I've got a specific program called Sketch Strategy, where I lead custom workshops for leadership teams in particular to help them build their 3-point communication skills and start bringing them into important meetings, important conversations, so that you can keep your team aligned and to avoid these dysfunctions so that you can get meaningful work done together. To learn more about those custom workshops, follow the link below this video or head straight on over to verbaltovisual.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.